Hello, this is Lauren Carr, and welcome to Authors on iTours, a podcast devoted to authors, book bloggers, and other book lovers alike.
Hello, welcome back to Authors on iTours. Today we have the honor of interviewing Justin Newland, who is currently on tour with I Read Book Tours with his novel, The Old Dragon's Head. Justin Newland's novels represent an innovative blend of genres, from historical fiction and crime to supernatural thrillers and mysteries. His stories deal with the themes of war, religion, and evolution, and speculate on the human spiritual place in the universe. Undeterred by the award of a doctorate in mathematics from Imperial College, London, Justin found his way to the creative keyboard and conceived his debut novel, The Genes of Isis, an epic fantasy set under ancient Egyptian skies. Next came the historical fantasy, The Old Dragon's Head, set in Ming Dynasty China in the shadows of the Great Wall. His next historical fantasy, The Coronation, speculates on the genesis of the most important event in the modern world, the Industrial Revolution. His fourth novel, The Abdication, is a supernatural thriller in which a young woman confronts her faith in a higher purpose and what it means to abdicate that faith. His work in progress is a two-book series, The Island of Angels, set in Elizabethan England, and is an epic tale of England's coming of age. The first novel in that series, The Mark of the Salamander, travels with Sir Francis Drake across the wide-open seas of discovery from 1577 to 1580, and is due to be released in September 2023. The second book in the series, The Midnight of the Eights, culminates in the repulse of the Spanish Armada in 1588. Justin Newland regularly gives talks to historical associations and libraries and enjoys giving radio interviews and making podcasts. Born 3 days before the end of 1953, he lives with his partner in plain sight of the Mendip Hills in Somerset, England. So welcome back to Authors on iTours, and today we are interviewing Justin Newland of The Old Dragon's Head. And Justin, thank you for joining us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about The Old Dragon's Head?
Okay, Lauren, thank you very much for having me on your YouTube channel, your Zoom call today. The Old Dragon's Head is my second novel. I began writing in about, 2007. My first novel was mythological fiction called The Genes of Isis. This is, The Old Dragon's Head is historical fiction. So it's set in a real place, first of all. The Old Dragon's Head is a real place. I will explain. And this is one of the things that began to fascinate me about Chinese culture, Chinese thought, Chinese ideology, Chinese philosophy, and so on. If you imagine the Great Wall of China, goes uphill and down, and up the hill and down and down. It's got a serpentine nature. Yeah?
Yes, so I looked at that, yeah.
Yeah, the Chinese believed that the Great Wall is occupied by a numinous or supernatural dragon, which when the Great Wall is set towards the north of the country to keep out the Mongols, who are the northern tribes. And the myth is, and a lot of countries have this myth. I mean, we have, I think in England here, Drake's drum will sound if there's a threat to the country. Okay. So when there's a threat to China's northern borders, this old dragon will rise up and defend it. Okay. So now you can imagine that the Great Wall.
Now is that really in the Chinese culture, or is this? fictional from you.
No,
Okay.
no. This is all good stuff. This is all Chinese culture.
So this is what they really did believe. Yes.
You know, they believe obviously there are yellow people and they live in a yellow land. And the throne of the emperor was called the Dragon Throne.
Okay. Yeah, and that's in your synopsis too. That's what they're battling
I didn't make
over.
this stuff up, you know. That's the good thing about
all right.
finding a culture like this. You don't have to make it up. Half the stuff in history is far more extraordinary than the truth you can make up.
Okay.
So you get to the far eastern end of the Great Wall, where the Great Wall meets the sea for the only time. And that is the head of the old dragon.
That's the head. So whenever I was reading the synopsis, I was thinking that maybe it was an actual head.
Well, the head in that, the old dragon is having a drink. So don't disturb it. Okay. So actually, it comes out in the Yellow Sea. It's actually called the Bohai Sea, but it's just part of the Yellow Sea. And the town that is there now is called Shanghai Wan. And the old dragon's head, Lao Long, is the old dragon. And the Lao Long Tao is the old dragon's head. And I've sent you some pictures of what it looks like today, because they have rebuilt the end of the wall for tourists. It's a tourist attraction. Okay. Because you can see at the bit of the sea that there is a bit of a head where there's a kind of a castle and a bit of the wall jutting out into the sea, right?
Okay.
And then what you've got in the far distance at the end of the picture, you've got mountains, and there's a plain. There's a 10-kilometer gap between the mountains called the Yanshan Mountains and the sea, the Yellow Sea. And what had happened in 1368, this is again the historical background to the story. The Mongols had been defeated by the Chinese, and in 1380 they decided to fortify this section of the wall, because in 1380 there was no wall. It stopped at the mountains. Okay. So they decided, along with other parts of the wall, to strengthen. As you probably know, the wall wasn't built in one go. It was all built in different bits at different times.
Yes.
So this bit from the mountains to the sea was built in 1380. And you can see it's got a fortress, two fortresses, one in the middle there on the plain. It's got a kind of river running through it. And if you go into the detail of it, you begin to understand the whole ideology of Feng Shui. The way they've designed this is not arbitrary at all. It's all to do with having yin and yang balanced and in the right places, and having the right kind of influences coming from the sea, coming from the land, having certain things behind and certain things in front. And it's all, you know, you think it's just arbitrary, but it's no way is it arbitrary. It's all designed against, supernatural influence, if you like. And so that's what began to get me interested in the culture, because I'm sort of fascinated by.
Now, did you ever visit here?
I didn't. No, I mean, at the time I was writing this was just a year or two before COVID. And it was just a bit too far for me to go, but I did a lot of research, obviously, online. Went to Chinese section of British Museum. And what makes it attractive to me as a writer, exploring, I suppose, fantasy, but at the same time exploring what I would call the supernatural or the esoteric or the occult or these kinds of elements. What I was trying to get inside was that the Chinese people didn't just believe that there were these demons, there were these dragons, there were these ghosts, there were these gods. They lived it. And there's a difference. we might believe that there are ghosts or not believe. But if you live it and everybody else around you lives it, if it's part of your culture, it's a whole different scenario. And that was the scenario I was trying to get inside in the novel. I was trying to describe that mindset. Because we kind of think of these things as outside of ourselves. But to them, it was as real as having breakfast or having rice for dinner. Do you know what I mean? It was real.
It was part of their life. It was part of their culture. Right. And it wasn't just something fictional with them. For them, that it was actually real, and there was a real dragon's head. And so now what your story, what your book starts out with is, it's been 20 years since because the dragon's head awakens like every 100 years, or
that's kind of my I've introduced some fictional elements there.
Yes.
I mean, to give you a bit more background, because the Chinese believed in karma. Karma is where you do bad things and bad things happen to you.
Yes.
You do good things and good things happen to you. Okay, it's a very simple idea. Because they'd been invaded by the Mongols, they thought there must have been, they knew that they were living in the wrong way because they'd invited the invasion.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Therefore, once they defeated them, they were trying to find a new way of living. They were trying to find a renaissance.
Yes.
Okay? Now, here we are in 1400 talking about a renaissance in China. Now, it just so happened that in 1400 in Europe, they were beginning what we now term as the Renaissance. And I'm thinking, there's something going on here in world history. There's two major cultures in the world, both of them in Renaissance.
Yes.
So these are the kind of things that got me intrigued about that particular time in history, and about particularly China itself, because I think if you look at they were incredibly superstitious, like the Europeans and probably a lot of other people. But the Chinese were probably the most developed nation in the world at the time, if I may say that.
Yes, I heard they were the ones who invented spaghetti.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard.
Yeah, gunpowder, paper.
Yeah, a lot of things.
All this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So in 1368, I don't know if it's kind of appropriate to go and have a look at the preface. Gives more context to it's not just the belief in it, it's the living of it, and just imagine this scenario, right? Okay, so this is a real event. Okay, this is not fictional. It really happened, and it's in Nanjing in China on the 23rd of January. That's obviously our date. It was in the Chinese year of the goat, and the year that we would have called it is 1368, and it's from the standpoint or viewpoint of Zhu Wanzang, and he is the rebel leader who has defeated the Mongols. And it goes as follows: I, Zhu Wanzang, have expelled the Mongol invader. For too many winters we have suffered at the hands of the barbarian, that's the Mongols. I will restore the greatness of China, both in heaven and on earth. While my followers exhorted me to grasp the mandate of heaven, that's step onto the throne of China, if you like, I dared not do so without a propitious sign. 5 days ago, on a cold, snowy day, I erected an altar of worship to the supreme cosmic deity. I prayed that if the Lord on high approved my new ruling house, then the appointed day of my enthronement, the 23rd of January 1368, that's the day he's talking this, would be a bright day. Today is that day, and miracle of miracles, the warm rays of the sun pierced the gloom and have melted the frozen earth. The Lord on high has heard my supplication. The yang exerts itself on the yin. The order of the Tao is restored, and thus I take my seat on the dragon throne. As a bright day in heaven means a bright day on earth, I name this the Ming, meaning the bright dynasty. And this is from Zhu Wanzang, the Hongwu Emperor, and it's taken from a book called The Great Ming Code.
Okay, so and that actually did happen.
Yeah. So imagine, we've got a coronation here in a week or so. King Charles, right? King Charles III going up to the Westminster Abbey and saying, right, if it's snow, the snow's melted in 5 days' time, I will accept that as a sign by the gods to step onto the throne. See what this guy's doing.
That's very much exactly what he's doing. And the sun is shining.
Yeah.
And the dog is barking.
Yeah. That's right. So all is, of course, the sun and the melting of the snow is all to do with yin and yang, as suggested. They have to have the yang, which is the warm, melting the yin, which is the snow and the cold. That's the order of the Tao, the Tao, D-A-O. And because that was signified in nature, he took that as a sign that his order, his ruling order, was going to be similar and therefore acceptable to the higher principles of things.
Okay, so now where do you jump off from there for your novel?
Well, the novel starts about 32 years later, in about 1400.
Okay.
When the emperor has died. Now, they had a system of primogeniture, which means the firstborn son of the first consort takes the throne. But he, unfortunately, had died before the Hongwu emperor died. So he had to decide who was going to succeed him, and he chose the son of his firstborn son who had died. So, but the grandson had not.
So his grandson. So sort of like Queen Elizabeth picking William instead of Charles.
Exactly.
Okay.
So this created some dissension amongst the ranks, and because, of course, they had a harem type system, they had consorts, and he had many children. So one of the nephews raised an army, and there was a war of succession.
Okay.
And that's the backstory to the novel, and that's true. It happened, and ironies of irony. In some ways, the Mongols, who had been defeated, held the balance of power between who if they would join the grandson, or would they join the other opponent. So there was some very interesting moral dilemmas that the leaders got into as to whether they would accept support from the Mongols, and of course they did. So this is the story that's happening, and the story unfolds with a young man who is an apprentice working on the wall, and he has visions of he actually sees the prince's army coming back from a battle. And he sees ghosts in the army.
Okay.
Ghosts of fallen soldiers and of generals. And then somebody explains to him, well, this is actually quite normal, because when somebody dies, a warrior or a soldier dies, he doesn't know anything else but to hang out with the army.
Okay.
But he's worried, of course, that he's seeing these ghosts, and he goes to see the abbot to try and explain what they mean. Is it a good thing, a bad thing? He then goes to see the seer. But I found a place for this lady, Luli, who was also has quite an extraordinary position in the story. I don't know if I can explain it to you, but the Buddhists have an idea of something called the transmigration of souls. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Well, I'm a little bit familiar with it, but why don't you explain that for those who aren't?
Okay. The Chinese called the soul the Po, the word Po. And the idea is, I mean, it's basically how the Dalai Lama is chosen even to today. And the idea is that when somebody dies, their soul migrates to a person being born nearby at that time.
Okay.
So with the Dalai Lama, when the Dalai Lama dies, they have to wait a few years to find out where his soul has gone, because the child has obviously got to grow up and show signs of being religiously inclined. You see what I mean? That's how they do it.
Yeah, basically reincarnation. That sounds
basically,
like
reincarnation,
very much
yes,
like reincarnation.
That's right. This lady, Luli, so we have these things called post offices in England. I'm sure you probably have them in America.
Oh yeah, we
so
have.
I imagine that
post office. Yeah.
So she has something called a PO office.
Okay.
And what happens is that somebody who's going to die writes some distinguishing features on an envelope and their name, so that a person who's going to inherit their soul can go to the PO office and try to identify whose soul they've got.
Okay. All right.
So she represents a kind of a midwife of missing souls. And that's her task in life, to try to join up somebody who's now got somebody else's soul, so that they know whose it was.
Okay. All right. That's
so I love playing with this kind of stuff. And again, of course, I don't know if they had PO offices. I just made that up. But they do have this idea of transmigration of souls.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw it was called a PO, I thought I've got to try and do something with this, because it's too much like a post office. So you get the idea.
Did they actually back then have somebody who she collected the the mail for people who were dying to be?
I honestly don't know.
Okay,
but I had heard that back in the day that was the origin of an IOU.
Yeah.
That in China, back in the day, back possibly before the time of Christ, or back in the time of, say, Confucius, it was quite legitimate for one person who was going to die to issue an IOU or accept an IOU from somebody who was going to die. And they would then go to the person who inherited their soul to say, hang on, mate, you've got this fellow's soul, he owed me money, I now want the money from you. Okay. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. I told you life's more extraordinary.
Well, if they're only 2 or 3 years old, how are they going to get the money to pay?
He's got to wait. You've got to wait till they grow up.
Okay. Right. And if he's still around. Okay, so what if the person who this is going to, who is owed, and they die before the other person grows up, then does that IOU get passed on to the next soul?
That's me.
Yeah.
Just telling you what I heard.
Okay.
But they had quite extraordinary beliefs in the afterworld, and I think that's what I'm trying to example here, and what I tried to explore in the novel. Quite extraordinary lengths they would go to. I read a short story set or written in those times where two very good friends or brothers had made a pact, somehow sort of solemn pact, to meet in a certain place at a certain time. One of the brothers got delayed unavoidably and couldn't get there physically. So committed suicide and sent his ghost to the meeting.
Oh, okay.
To fulfill the honor of the meeting, even if he was dead to do it. Right? I mean, you just can't make this stuff up, can you? I haven't even talked about the novel yet, have I?
I'm still. So what happens with the seer, the gentleman who's seeing the ghosts? Is he the dragon master, and how does he realize that he's the dragon head master?
Wow, there you are. You see, you're going to have to read the novel, aren't you?
Yeah.
Can't tell you too much, can I?
No, you don't want. We don't want to provide any spoilers.
But it's a very good question. Of course, that's what I'm wanting you to get curious about, and what I wanted to explore in the novel. And there are other characters in the novel. In fact, it's got 4 altogether. One is who is a magistrate, and he has ulterior motives which don't come out until later. Again, I can't say for spoilers what they are.
Yes.
But it allowed me to explore and research the judicial system that they had in China. Whether they have it today in the same way, I don't know. But in those days, they insisted that a person who was accused of a crime, presumably they were sure that they'd committed them, admitted their guilt before they went on trial.
They wanted them and what if they hadn't committed the crime?
There you see. Now, it's a very interesting concept compared to our European or American ideas of justice and of jurisprudence. Because on the one hand, you could argue that what is the point of sending someone to prison to reform and correct them if they haven't admitted their crime?
Okay, but isn't there a trial to see if they actually are guilty of it? Because if
there
they
is,
aren't guilty of it, they're not going to admit to it. I mean,
well, you may say that, but of course, what it then they thought it gave them a mandate to do was to apply, what should we say, persuasive techniques.
Torture.
Torture, to elicit the confession. Right. So there's swings and roundabouts here, because they were very much for, their thought pattern, as you saw, as I illustrated in the preface, is to have to keep the gods happy. You can't do anything without keeping the gods happy.
Because of the whole karma thing.
Yeah, the whole karma thing. And the Great Ming Code was a book, of which that was an illustration, of a whole series of punishments, corrections, and impositions that a person had to do if they didn't make a sacrifice at the right time, if they didn't say the right prayer at the right time, if they went to market on the wrong day, they wore the wrong coloured clothing. I discovered the other day in Elizabethan times in England, you had to wear the right colour clothing. So it wasn't just in China, so it was all set out. And again, it wasn't just, the punishment was different depending on what class you were in society. If you're a Mandarin, it was different to if you were a peasant. I suppose it was more severe the more senior you were. I found it fascinating to research this whole different concept of jurisprudence, because we're so familiar with our own that perhaps we get sidetracked into thinking that's the only way to run a justice system, which is going back to Roman times and Greek times. But of course there are other systems, and one of the things I certainly realized in researching this novel is how Eurocentric or Western centric my concept of history is. You think we've got wide views on everything, but actually they're mostly based in our Western ideals and Western ideas. Yeah.
And that does affect how people think, yes. So because the culture, and back then, with this or with any of your novels, because you're diving, and it sounds like you're deep diving into these other cultures, how does that affect it certainly would affect in creating your characters, because they're
Yeah,
going to think differently than you. So what
exactly.
challenges did you run into in creating the characters that you put in your books?
I suppose immense in a way, because I suppose, in answer to your question, one thing comes up. Say, for example, you take ancient Egypt. Okay, it's a little bit further away, but the idea remains. It would be nice to understand how they thought, but I think that's impossible. I think the best we can do is to appreciate, or try and appreciate, how they thought and what they thought and why they thought it. And I suppose that's my guide in approaching these different cultures, is try to get an appreciation of how they thought and what they thought and why they thought it, what were they trying to achieve. And to some degree, I'm not sure that, say, the peasant knew what he was trying to achieve. Maybe the mandarins and the aristocrats knew a little bit more. But to some degree, a culture is driven by ideologies, isn't it? And often we're not aware of what those governing principles are. But it's certainly interesting to explore them. And we have such a huge benefit of hindsight. We can say, oh yeah, they did this wrong, they did that wrong. But can we sort out our own times? That's a rhetorical question. Yeah, okay. So, one is to explore the way a different culture thinks. And by dint of that effort, to act as a mirror to our own times, to our own culture, to our own way of thinking. Because I think that's the value of looking at history. I was thinking the other day, the now is the tides of history washing up on your shore. How about that?
Okay. All right. And there's definitely, there's the saying that you need to study history to know what happened in the past, so you don't make the same mistakes in the future.
Yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yes.
I'm not sure that ever happens, though, does it?
No, people never learn from their mistakes.
No, they don't.
We do them over and over and over again.
So, an appreciation, another reason would be to appreciate, yes, a different culture, to explore different cultures' jurisprudence or justice system, the way they thought about it. And again, I suppose what I'm trying to do in my novels is not just appreciate what happened, because we can read history for that, but what the fictional element allows me to do is to explore and speculate on why it happened and how it happened, which you can't really do in a history book. So that's what introduces the supernatural, the esoteric, the fantasy elements, if you like, where different characters are imbued with different motives. Another reason to explore this or read this novel is to learn about something called the Bagua, Bagua, which it turns out is the design in one of the Chinese methods of divination. And it's explored and explained in the book, because you might have heard of things like the I Ching, which is called the Book of Change. And there's various ideas about divination, because they were trying to read the trends of the time to see what those trends are going to end up as, which is basically what divination is about.
And do you see any of that today or in other cultures other than China? Do they continue today, or are these beliefs or influence?
Well, it's a very good question. One of the other things, I don't know, I did send you a picture of the Zhendong Gate. The Zhendong Gate is the main gate to the fortress on that 10-kilometer gap that I was explaining to you between the Yanshan Mountains and the sea. And above the gate is the saying, the first pass under heaven. Okay.
All right.
Yeah,
so Justin, explain to this. This is the gate.
Yeah. So if you remember the map, it showed a fortress in the middle of the pass, and this is the gate into that fortress. And the Chinese lettering at the top of the gate, above the open gate, translates into English as the first pass under heaven. Now, remember, I'm giving this as an example as one of the reasons to read the novel. Okay. And one of the reasons to read the novel is to understand more about the Chinese mindset. The first pass under heaven is an example of that mindset, because what that says to me is, if there's anything supernatural coming from heaven, it's going to come here first. We're waving a flag here saying, hey, God, send us all your high force, come to us first. Everybody else is second, right?
Yes.
That's the Chinese mindset, even today, to my mind. So the way it translated in those times, and you can read more about it in the novel, is that they believed that they were the chosen race, if you like.
Yes.
They believed that the Han gene, HAN, the Han people, they were the chosen race. Everybody else, that's you, Lauren, me, Justin, and everybody else, we're the barbarians.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Now, if that's in their mindset of thousands and millions of people for hundreds and thousands of years, it still has a residue today. Must do. You know.
Yes.
It's a bit like you put a seed in the ground and you grow a plant. It's gonna show the coloring of the seed somewhere, not be in their mindset, even if it's
it's there from it passed from generation to generation.
So all of this comes out in the novel. That, you know, it's interesting that one of the ways that they enforced satellite states was obviously to extract tribute from them. Another way that people say the Koreans who are nearby on the peninsula would show that they were a satellite state would be to adopt the calendar.
And what's that?
Adopt the calendar.
Okay. All right.
The Chinese calendar.
So the year of the dog, the year of the cat.
So they followed the days and so on and so on. So quite extraordinary way of thinking. It's saying basically, if you follow our gods, then you must be one of us, because the gods determine the calendar. And you know, there's all these almanacs that they had. They'd consult about the best day to go to market, the best day for a wedding. I mean, to some degree, we have the residual of that even in our own culture, don't we? You know, we'll choose what we hope is the sunniest day or something. You know, and they'll choose where to build a house against the principles of feng shui, of mountain and sea and air.
So the design, because you have the book cover behind you, can you tell people a little bit about this?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, it's sure. It's by a really quite well known and very accomplished cover designer, a guy named Jim Burns. He doesn't live too far from me. just outside Bristol, in England. And he's done loads of covers. He's got some wonderful artwork. When I was writing the mythological fiction novel, I went to a world fantasy conference, writers' conference in Brighton, looking around for a cover artist. And I came across his work, and I knew he had this kind of magical way of introducing in the same picture something of the supernatural, and that's what I wanted in some of the artwork he's done. So he's done this with the head of the old dragon and the dragon itself, and I've got a picture of the whole cover, not just the front as well, because there's a whole piece of artwork. It goes all the way across the back. It's a wonderful piece of artwork. Yeah, Jim Burns is his name, Burns. He's still working today. Yeah.
And on your, and I encourage folks to visit your tour page, because we have you read an excerpt from the book on your tour page. We have that on there. And what are you working on now, Justin?
I'm working on a 2-book series. Funny enough, you said I don't do series, but now I've started a series, but only because I set out to write about Elizabethan times. So I'd written about Egypt, I've written about China, I've written about Eastern Europe, I've written a novel set in the Middle East. So I thought I'd better write a bit about England, and about England's coming of age, which I think is the Elizabethan times. The sort of 1560s, 1570s, 1580s. So the first novel, I'm currently doing a copy edit. It's being published in September, and it's called The Mark of the Salamander. Salamander is the spirit of fire. So it follows a young character who gets on board Francis Drake's Golden Hind, and it follows him around the world on a journey. So it's his journey as he sails around the world and what he learns. And he ends up one time in California with the Mohawk Indians. Then I'm also working on book 2, which is the repulse of the Armada, the Spanish Armada. So it's those two really momentous events in English medieval history is occupying my time at the moment.
Oh, yeah. And you do a lot. It looks like you do a deep dive, Justin, into the, I really appreciate that. I respect that you do such a deep dive into, and you go and you don't concentrate on one. You're going from one culture to another. So you're just going all around the world.
Well, yeah, I suppose I am. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm enjoying every minute of it, Lauren. I think we have to challenge ourselves as best we can, and sort of set ourselves goals which are just out of reach, and something we can still attain, but which stretch us. It's easy to do stuff that we can do already. There's no point doing that, is there? We've got to try and stretch ourselves, do something new, do something different, add in a refinement, whatever it is.
And that concludes this episode of Authors on iTours. If you enjoyed this episode, then do give us a like and a thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe so that you can receive notifications for upcoming episodes of Authors on iTours. In the meantime, happy reading!